What would you do if your husband brought his mistress to your funeral? Picture this, a church filled with 200 mourners, a mahogany coffin holding a pregnant woman who died under mysterious circumstances. And then the doors swing open and her husband walks in,
How could
hand
you
in
do
hand
this? You
with the
stole
woman he had been
everything,
cheating
Marcus.
with for months.
Jessica, please,
But
I can
here is what
explain.
nobody in that church
It
knew.
wasn't like that.
The dead wife,
Let go
she
of
was
me!
not a victim.
How dare you
She
do
was a
this?
mastermind.
I demand
While
that you release
everyone
me
thought
right
she was
now.
a simple elementary
done
school
nothing
teacher
wrong.
making worksheets about butterflies, she was secretly building a $47 million empire. While her husband plotted to steal everything and run away with his mistress, she was documenting every lie, every crime, every betrayal. And she left behind a video that would be played at her own funeral, a video that would destroy everyone who ever underestimated her. What happens next will shock you. Stay with me until the end, because the final twist, nobody saw it coming. Not even me. This is the story of Rachel Morrison, and this is how a dead woman got the ultimate revenge. The mahogany coffin sat at the front of St. Andrew's Church like a monument to tragedy, surrounded by arrangements of white lilies and soft, flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows across the polished wood. 200 mourners filled the ancient pews, dressed in varying shades of black, their faces etched with the particular kind of grief that comes from losing someone far too young. The air was thick with the scent of flowers and expensive perfume, underlaid by something heavier, something that felt like collective disbelief. At the center of it all, in that beautiful coffin that cost more than most people make in a month, lay Rachel Morrison, 32 years old, elementary school teacher, devoted friend, expectant mother, dead. I stood in the third row from the front, clutching a tissue I had already soaked through twice, my black dress feeling too tight around my chest where grief had settled like a physical weight. My name is Claire Bennett, and the woman in that coffin was not just my friend. She was my sister in every way that mattered, my confidant since we were 7 years old. My partner in every adventure and misadventure life had thrown our way for 25 years. 25 years of friendship, of secrets whispered in the dark, of tears wiped away and laughter shared, of late-night phone calls that lasted until dawn, and Sunday brunches where we solved all the problems of the world over mimosas and pancakes. All of it was over now, ended in this cold stone church with its vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows that seemed to mock the darkness of the occasion with their colorful depictions of hope and salvation. Rachel had been pregnant when she died, 8 months along with the little girl she had already named Hope. The baby survived, delivered by emergency cesarean section while her mother's body failed around her. 4 pounds, 2 ounces of fighting spirit in the NICU, completely unaware that she would never know the woman who had loved her so fiercely, who had sung to her through the walls of her belly, who had spent hours picking out the perfect shade of yellow for the nursery walls. The doctors called it complications. They used words like unexpected infection and rapid organ failure and unprecedented decline. They shook their heads and spoke in hushed tones about how sometimes these things just happen, how medicine cannot explain everything, how they had done all they could. But I knew something the doctors did not know. I knew Rachel had been healthy as a horse her entire pregnancy. I knew she had been glowing with that particular radiance that comes to women carrying life inside them. I knew she had been strong and vital and planning for a future that should have stretched out before her for decades. And I knew with a certainty that sat in my gut like a stone that something was very, very wrong about how quickly she had deteriorated. The priest was speaking, his voice a practiced murmur of comfort and scripture that washed over the congregation like lukewarm water. He spoke of God's plan and eternal rest and the promise of reunion in heaven. I barely heard him. My eyes were fixed on the coffin, on the spray of white roses draped across its lid, on the framed photograph propped beside it showing Rachel at her radiant best, smiling at the camera with her hand resting on her pregnant belly. That was when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church swung open. The sound echoed through the sanctuary like a gunshot, cutting through the priest's gentle words and making every head in the place turn toward the source of the interruption. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the doorway was blinding for a moment, silhouetting 2 figures against its brightness. Marcus Morrison stepped into his wife's funeral like he was walking into a board meeting he found mildly inconvenient. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost $3,000, his dark hair perfectly styled, his jaw set with the casual confidence of a man who had never once in his 35 years on Earth been told that he could not have exactly what he wanted. His shoulders were squared, his stride unhurried, his expression arranged into something that might have passed for solemn if you did not look too closely at his eyes. But it was not Marcus who made the entire congregation gasp as one. It was the woman beside him. Jessica Crane walked into that funeral holding Marcus's hand like she had every right to be there, like she belonged at his side, like she was not the other woman, the mistress, the homewrecker who had been sleeping with another woman's husband while that woman carried his child. She was 28 years old, blonde in that expensive highlighted way that requires hours in a salon chair, beautiful in the manufactured manner that speaks of personal trainers and careful diets in a skincare routine that costs more than some people's car payments. Her black dress was designer, probably Valentino, cut to show off her figure while still maintaining the appearance of funeral-appropriate modesty. Her heels were red-soled Louboutins that clicked against the marble floor with each step, the sound obscene in the sacred silence of the church. I watched her walk down that center aisle on my dead best friend's husband's arm, and I felt something inside me turn to ice. Behind me, I heard Rachel's mother make a sound I will never forget. Betty Johnson was 61 years old, a small woman made smaller by life's hardships, who had worked double shifts at a truck stop diner in rural Tennessee for 30 years, just to give her daughter a shot at something better. She had driven 14 hours straight to be at this funeral, probably in the same ancient Honda Civic she had owned since Rachel was in middle school. She had buried her own mother, her husband, and now her only child. And through it all, she had maintained a dignity and grace that humbled everyone who knew her. But watching her son-in-law walk into her daughter's funeral with his mistress broke something in Betty Johnson. She made a sound like a wounded animal, a keen of pure anguish that cut through the whispers and gasps, and her knees buckled beneath her. I caught her before she hit the ground, wrapping my arms around her frail body, feeling her shake with sobs she could not control. Here is something I learned in that moment, standing in that church with my arms around a grieving mother while her daughter's betrayer paraded his mistress past the coffin. When someone shows you who they are at their worst moment, at the moment when basic human decency should override everything else, believe them. This was not grief making Marcus cruel. This was not shock or confusion or some misguided attempt to find comfort. This was Marcus Morrison finally dropping the mask he had worn for years, finally showing his true face to everyone who had ever given him the benefit of the doubt. I have seen trash take itself out before. I have watched people reveal their true characters in moments of crisis. But never in my life have I seen someone do it in a $3,000 suit at his pregnant wife's funeral, with his mistress on his arm and a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Marcus guided Jessica to the front row of the church, to the seats that had been reserved for family, to the places of honor directly in front of the coffin containing the woman he had promised to love and cherish until death did them part. He sat down without acknowledging Betty, without so much as a glance at the woman who had raised the wife he had just buried. Jessica settled beside him, crossing her legs at the ankle like she was at a charity luncheon, her expression carefully neutral except for the slight upturn at the corners of her lips. The whispers started immediately, spreading through the pews like wildfire through dry grass. I saw phones emerging from purses and pockets despite the solemnity of the occasion. I saw people openly filming, their screens held at angles they probably thought were subtle. By the time Marcus took his seat, I knew the scandal was already going viral, spreading across social media platforms and group chats and gossip networks, while Rachel's body lay cold in its coffin not 20 feet away. The priest had stopped speaking. He stood at his podium looking lost, his prepared remarks about eternal peace and God's mercy rendered absurd by the spectacle unfolding before him. For a long moment, no one seemed to know what to do. The tension in the church was so thick I could taste it, a bitter mixture of outrage and disbelief and something else, something that felt almost like anticipation. Then attorney Thomas Whitmore stood up. I had met Tom Whitmore exactly once before, 3 days earlier, when he had called me into his office and told me things about Rachel that I had never known. Things that had made me question how well I had actually known my best friend. Things that had made me realize she had been playing a game none of us understood, and that the final moves were about to be made. He was 58 years old, distinguished in that old money Connecticut way, with silver hair that swept back from a high forehead and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. He had been a corporate lawyer for 30 years before transitioning into estate planning, and he had the quiet authority of a man who had seen it all and been surprised by none of it. He walked to the front of the church with measured steps, his movements unhurried, his expression grave. The priest stepped aside without a word, ceding the podium to this unexpected speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore said, and his voice carried to every corner of the church without the need to raise it. There was something in his tone that made people sit up straighter, that made the whispers die away, that made even Marcus look up from his phone with the first hint of unease I had seen on his face since he walked through those doors. "Before we conclude this service, I have been instructed by the deceased to read her final will. Here, now, in front of everyone she loved." He paused and his gaze swept across the congregation before landing on Marcus and Jessica in the front row. His next words were quiet, but they hit like hammer blows. "And everyone who betrayed her." Marcus's confident posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Beside him, Jessica's perfectly manicured hand tightened on his arm, her knuckles going white beneath their French tips. Whitmore reached into his jacket and withdrew a thick envelope, the kind lawyers use for important documents. He held it up so everyone could see it, then began to break the seal with deliberate ceremony. I did not understand it then. I did not know what Rachel had been planning, what secrets she had been keeping, what empire she had been building in silence, while everyone around her saw only a sweet elementary school teacher who made worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. But standing in that church, watching the color drain from Marcus Morrison's face as Attorney Whitmore prepared to read his dead wife's will, I began to understand something important. Rachel had known. She had known about the betrayal, about the lies, about everything that had been done to her in secret. And she had not just accepted it, she had not curled up and died like a good little victim. She had prepared. What none of them knew, I thought, watching Marcus shift uncomfortably in his seat, while 200 people stared at him with undisguised contempt. What even I had not known until 3 days ago. Rachel spent the last months of her life building a trap. And everyone who had ever hurt her, everyone who had ever underestimated her, everyone who had ever looked at that sweet face and seen only weakness, had just walked straight into it. To understand how we arrived at this moment, with my best friend in a coffin and her husband's mistress sitting in the family pew like she belonged there, I need to take you back. Back before the betrayal and the secrets and the careful plans laid in darkness. Back to the beginning of a love story that would end in tragedy and triumph in equal measure. Rachel Ann Johnson grew up in a trailer park on the outskirts of a small town in rural Tennessee, the kind of place that does not appear on most maps and that its residents are always trying to escape. Her mother Betty worked double shifts at a truck stop diner, coming home at 3 in the morning, smelling of coffee and grease, her feet swollen and her back aching, but her smile always ready for her little girl. There was no father in the picture. Betty never talked about him, and Rachel learned early not to ask. What Rachel did have was intelligence, a fierce, burning intelligence that her teachers recognized immediately, that set her apart from the other kids in their struggling school district, that made guidance counselors shake their heads in wonder and say things like, "That girl could go places if she gets half a chance." Betty Johnson was determined to give her daughter that chance. She worked extra shifts whenever she could get them. She took on side jobs cleaning houses for the wealthy families in the nice part of town. She saved every penny that was not absolutely necessary for survival, hiding cash in Kaffe cans and under mattresses and in a savings account she never touched, no matter how desperate things got. When Rachel was 17, she received a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. She cried when she got the letter. Betty cried too, standing in the kitchen of their tiny trailer, with her daughter's future in her hands, all those years of sacrifice finally meaning something. Rachel arrived at college with 2 suitcases, $300 in cash, and a determination to succeed that bordered on ferocious. She worked 3 jobs during her time at UVA. She waited tables at a diner off campus, serving entitled college kids who rarely tipped and older locals who treated her like furniture. She tutored struggling students in economics and business, subjects she had taught herself from library books and online courses. She cleaned dorm rooms on weekends, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets for people who would never know her name. And still she maintained a 4.0 grade point average. Still she made the dean's list every semester. Still she graduated with honors and the respect of every professor who had ever taught her. That was where she met Marcus Morrison. He was everything Rachel was not. Rich where she was poor, connected where she was isolated, confident in the way that only people who have never truly struggled can be confident. His family had money going back generations, old Connecticut wealth built on investments and inheritances, and the kind of networking that happens at country clubs and yacht parties. Marcus was struggling in his economics class when Rachel was assigned to tutor him. He showed up to their first session 20 minutes late, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than Rachel's entire wardrobe, looking at her like she was the help. She should have walked away right then. Looking back, knowing everything I know now, I can see all the warning signs that Rachel missed or chose to ignore. The casual arrogance, the assumption that his time was more valuable than hers, the way he looked at her laptop, her clothes, her shoes, and she could see him calculating her net worth and finding her lacking. But Marcus Morrison had not become as successful as he was without learning how to read people. He saw something in Rachel that first day. Maybe it was her intelligence. Maybe it was her beauty, the kind of natural prettiness that did not need designer clothes or expensive makeup to shine. Or maybe it was something darker. Maybe he saw a woman who had spent her whole life fighting for scraps and thought she would be grateful for whatever crumbs he chose to throw her way. He changed tactics. He started showing up on time. He brought her coffee, remembering how she took it without being told twice. He asked questions about her life, her family, her dreams for the future, and he listened to the answers with what seemed like genuine interest. He pursued her relentlessly. He showed up at the diner where she worked, ordering coffee he did not drink just to watch her move between tables. He sent flowers to her tiny apartment, extravagant arrangements that must have cost a fortune. He wrote her notes that were surprisingly sweet for a boy who had never had to work for anything in his privileged life. Rachel resisted at first. She was not stupid. She knew they came from different worlds, knew his family would never accept a waitress's daughter, knew that fairy tales were for children and happy endings were for people who did not have to worry about paying rent. But Marcus was persistent and charming, and so very good at saying exactly what she needed to hear. "I will never be like those people," he told her one night, when she finally admitted why she had been keeping him at arm's length. "The rich kids who look down on everyone else. That is not who I am, Rachel. I love you for who you are, not despite where you came from. Your background does not matter to me." She believed him. God help her, she believed him. They got married 5 years later at his family's country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was the maid of honor, standing beside my best friend in a dress I had bought on sale and altered myself, watching her face glow with a happiness that made my heart ache with joy for her. Rachel made her own wedding dress. Did you know that? She designed it herself and sewed it by hand over 6 months because Diana Morrison, Marcus's mother, had refused to pay for a gown for what she called the help. "Trailer trash does not deserve Vera Wang," Diana had said, not knowing I was standing just around the corner, hearing every poisoned word. "No matter how much perfume you spray on it, trash is still trash." I should have told Rachel. I have thought about that moment 1,000 times since then, replaying it in my mind, wondering if things would have been different if I had just opened my mouth and spoken the truth. But she looked so happy that day, standing at the altar in her homemade dress with flowers in her hair, saying vows to a man she loved with her whole heart. I could not bring myself to destroy that. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me complicit in everything that followed. I have had a lot of time to think about it, and I still do not know the answer. The wedding reception was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Beautiful because Rachel was radiant, because the venue was stunning, because for a few hours it seemed like love really could conquer all the differences between two people from opposite worlds. Terrible because I watched Diana Morrison work the room, whispering poison into every ear, making sure everyone knew exactly what she thought of her new daughter-in-law. Give it 5 years, I heard Diana say to a woman dripping in diamonds, her voice carrying just far enough for me to catch. Trailer park is trailer park. The novelty will wear off, and Marcus will remember what he was raised to value. 5 years, that was Diana's prediction. She was off by 3. The first 2 years of the marriage were good, at least on the surface. Rachel and Marcus moved into a beautiful apartment on the Upper East Side of the Manhattan. He started working at a prestigious investment banking firm. She got a job teaching third grade at a private school in the city, molding young minds and coming home with stories about her students that made her whole face light up. Then Rachel discovered Marcus's gambling. He had lost $50,000 at a casino in Atlantic City. $50,000 in a single weekend. Money they did not have. Money he had borrowed against their joint credit cards and a loan he had taken out in both their names without telling her. He cried when she confronted him. Real tears, or at least they looked real. He fell to his knees in their living room and begged for forgiveness, swearing it was a one-time mistake, promising it would never happen again, saying all the things that people say when they are caught and desperate and not yet ready to change. Rachel used her inheritance to pay his debts. Her grandmother had worked as a housekeeper for 50 years, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for wealthy families who probably never learned her name. When she died, she left Rachel $50,000, every penny she had managed to save over half a century of backbreaking labor. Rachel gave it all to Marcus, without hesitation, without resentment, because she loved him, because she believed in their marriage, because she thought that was what wives were supposed to do. I told her she was crazy. We were sitting in my apartment in Queens, drinking wine out of coffee mugs because I had broken all my wine glasses during a movie, and I looked her dead in the eye and said words I still remember exactly. Girl, the only thing you should be gambling on is whether he will remember your anniversary. Not your retirement fund, not your grandmother's life savings, not your entire financial future. She laughed and said I worried too much. She said Marcus had learned his lesson. She said every marriage had rough patches, and this was just theirs. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Around that time, Rachel started what she called a little hobby. She had created some teaching materials for her classroom, lesson plans and worksheets and activities that her students loved. A colleague suggested she try selling them online on a platform called Teachers Pay Teachers and later on Etsy. Just for fun, Rachel said, a little extra money, maybe enough to pay for a vacation someday. Marcus dismissed it completely. He came home one day while Rachel was working on her laptop, designing a unit on butterflies and life cycles, and he looked over her shoulder with a smirk that made my fists clench when Rachel told me about it later. That is adorable, honey, he said. Stick to teaching. Leave the business stuff to me. Rachel smiled and nodded and went back to her work. But I knew my best friend. I knew her better than anyone in the world, or at least I thought I did. And I saw something in her eyes when she told me that story. A flash of something I had never seen before. Not hurt, not disappointment, not resignation. Something sharper, something cold, something that looked almost like calculation. Looking back, I think that was the moment everything changed. The moment Rachel stopped being the naive girl from Tennessee who believed in fairy tales and started becoming something else entirely. Something patient, something strategic, something dangerous. But I did not understand that then. I did not see what was really happening behind my best friend's sweet smile and gentle demeanor. I thought she was coping. I thought she was adjusting. I thought she was doing what women have done for centuries when they find themselves trapped in difficult marriages with no clear way out. I had no idea she was building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel was 6 months pregnant and more radiant than I had ever seen her. Pregnancy suited her in a way that defied all the horror stories other women told about swollen ankles and constant nausea and skin that could not decide whether it wanted to glow or break out. She was luminous, soft around the edges in the best possible way, with one hand always resting on her belly like she was protecting something precious, which of course she was. We met for lunch on a Thursday in early spring at a little cafe in Brooklyn that served the kind of overpriced avocado toast that Instagram influencers pretend to eat. Rachel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window with sunlight streaming across her face, looking like a Renaissance painting of maternal bliss. But something was wrong. I could see it the moment I sat down. A tightness around her eyes that her smile could not quite hide. A tension in her shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. Tell me, I said, not bothering with small talk. We knew each other too well for that. Rachel took a deep breath. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card statement. I found this last week, she said. Look at the charges. Third line from the bottom. I looked. A jewelry store. Tiffany and Company. A charge for $4,300. He bought me jewelry, Rachel said, her voice flat. Except he did not give me any jewelry. No necklace, no earrings, no bracelet, nothing. Maybe it is a surprise, I offered, though even as I said it, I knew how hollow it sounded. Maybe he is waiting for a special occasion. Rachel shook her head. I checked our closet, his drawers, his office at home. There is no jewelry box hidden anywhere. No receipt for future pickup. Nothing. So where did $4,000 worth of Tiffany go? Rachel's eyes met mine, and in them, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Not surprise, not confusion, not even anger, really. Resignation. Like she had already known the answer and was just waiting for the evidence to confirm it. That is what I need to find out, she said. She did not confront Marcus right away. That was not Rachel's style, I learned. She had spent too many years watching her mother navigate difficult situations with grace and strategy. Too many years learning that knowledge is power, and the person who acts first is not always the person who wins. Instead, she hired a private investigator. His name was Mike Callahan, a retired NYPD detective who specialized in what he delicately called domestic surveillance. Rachel paid him with money from her teaching materials business, which she told me was doing pretty well these days. I did not think much of that comment at the time. Pretty well could mean anything. A few $100s a month. Enough to cover the investigator's fee without dipping into the household accounts that Marcus monitored obsessively. I had no idea what pretty well actually meant. Not yet. The photographs came back within a week. Rachel called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice steady in that particular way that meant she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. Can you come over? Marcus is working late. I need you to see something. I took the subway to her apartment on the Upper East Side, that beautiful place with its high ceilings and crown moldings that I had always secretly envied. Rachel met me at the door with red-rimmed eyes and a manila envelope clutched to her chest, like it contained something dangerous. It did. She spread the photographs across the dining room table, laying them out with trembling hands. Marcus and a blonde woman at a restaurant in Tribeca, their heads bent close together, his hand covering hers on the white tablecloth. Marcus and the same woman at a boutique hotel in Soho, entering the lobby with their arms around each other. Marcus and the woman on a beach somewhere. Martha's Vineyard, according to the geotag, walking hand in hand along the waterline like honeymooners. The woman was Jessica Crane, 28 years old, junior associate at Marcus's investment firm. 87,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted carefully curated glimpses of a glamorous life that I now realized my best friend's husband was funding. How long, I asked, though I was not sure I wanted to know the answer. The investigator thinks at least 8 months, Rachel said. Maybe longer. Since before I got pregnant. Maybe since before I even knew I was going to have a baby. We sat in silence for a long moment, the photographs spread between us like evidence at a crime scene, which, in a way, they were. What are you going to do? Rachel's jaw tightened. I am going to think. I am going to plan. And then I am going to make sure that when I act, I am ready for whatever comes next. She did not confront Marcus for another week. She used that time to prepare, though I did not know at the time how thoroughly she was preparing, or for what. When she finally brought up the affair, they were standing in the kitchen of their beautiful apartment. Rachel was calm, controlled, holding the photographs in her hand and asking a simple question. How long has this been going on? Marcus did not deny it. He did not apologize. He did not fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness like he had when she discovered his gambling. Instead, he attacked. You have been boring since you got pregnant, he said, and each word landed like a slap. All you talk about is the baby, nursery colors, pediatricians, what stroller to buy. It is exhausting, Rachel. I come home from work and I need someone who can actually have a conversation about something other than pregnancy symptoms. Rachel stood there, 6 months pregnant, one hand instinctively covering her belly, absorbing every word. Jessica understands the pressure I am under, Marcus continued. She appreciates what I do. She does not nag me about coming home for dinner or spending too much time at the office. She is supportive. She is exciting. She is everything you used to be before you became this incubator. Incubator. He called his pregnant wife an incubator, as casually as he might comment on the weather. But Marcus was not finished. The cruelty had been building for years, it seemed, held back by whatever thin veneer of decency he had been maintaining. Now it poured out like poison from a ruptured container. What are you going to do about it anyway? Leave me? With what money? You have nothing, Rachel, nothing without me. That teaching salary of yours would not cover the rent on a studio apartment in this city. Your little craft business selling lesson plans? Please, that is a hobby, not an income. He stepped closer, looming over her, using his height as a weapon. Your mother was a waitress in a truck stop diner, and you are just like her, a nobody, a charity case. I took you out of that trailer park and gave you a life you could never have achieved on your own. Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me. His voice dropped to a whisper that was somehow more threatening than if he had shouted. If you try to divorce me, I will destroy you. I will take this apartment. I will take our bank accounts. I will take the baby. My family has the best lawyers in New York, lawyers that have been working for Morrison's since before you were born. Your family has nothing. No money, no connections, no power. You will spend years fighting me in court, and by the end of it, you will have lost everything. You will be right back where you started, broke, alone, living in some run-down apartment with our daughter on the weekends, if you are lucky. Is that what you want? Is that the life you want for our child? Rachel did not respond. She could not. Her voice had left her, stolen by the magnitude of his cruelty, by the realization that the man she had married, the man she had loved and sacrificed for and believed in, had never existed at all. She drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue after he left for his evening with Jessica. She sat in her car for 2 hours and cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw and her hands had cramped from gripping the steering wheel. She called me from that parking garage, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. I wanted to drive to Manhattan immediately to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay. But she would not let me come. She said she needed to think. She said she needed to figure out what to do next. Here is something I learned that day, something that has stayed with me ever since. When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he is not threatening you. He is confessing. He is telling you his greatest fear, the thing that keeps him awake at night, the truth he cannot bear to face. He is terrified that you will realize he is nothing without you, that all his power and money and connections mean nothing if you decide to walk away, that he has built his entire sense of self-worth on keeping you small. And if you ever stood up to your full height, he would be revealed as the pathetic, insecure little man he has always been. Rachel wiped her tears after those 2 hours in the parking garage. She took out her phone and called a number I had never heard before. Tom, she said, her voice steady now, cold in a way that made something shift in my chest when she told me about it later. It is Rachel. I think it is time. Put everything in motion. That was when I learned the truth about my best friend. The truth she had been hiding for 6 years, building in silence while everyone around her saw only a sweet teacher who sold worksheets about butterflies. Her teaching materials business was not a hobby. It was not something that paid for the occasional vacation or nice dinner out. It was a $47 million company. EduSpark Digital, the largest independent teacher resource platform in the United States. Hundreds of thousands of subscribers, partnerships with school districts across the country, revenue streams from subscriptions and licensing and corporate training programs. Rachel had built it all herself, piece by piece, working early mornings and late nights, while Marcus thought she was grading papers or planning lessons. She had incorporated in Delaware before they were married, putting everything in an irrevocable trust that her husband could not touch. She had hired employees, negotiated contracts, made strategic decisions that had turned her little hobby into an empire. And Marcus had no idea. None at all. He thought she made $200 a month selling worksheets. He thought she was nothing without him. He thought he held all the power in their marriage, that he could threaten her with poverty and custody battles and know she had no choice but to comply. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Rachel met with attorney Thomas Whitmore 3 days after the confrontation with Marcus in a small cafe in Brooklyn that she chose specifically because no one from their Upper East Side social circle would ever set foot there. I was there too. At her insistence, she said she needed a witness, someone she trusted absolutely, who could verify that everything she was about to do was legal, documented, and above reproach. Tom Whitmore had known Rachel's mother for decades. He had worked a case at Betty's Diner years ago, back when he was a young prosecutor cutting his teeth on small-town crime. Betty had fed him coffee and tea and listened to him complain about the long hours and the ungrateful defendants, and they had formed an unlikely friendship that had lasted ever since. When Rachel needed legal advice about starting her business, she called Tom. When she needed help structuring her company to protect it from a husband she was already beginning to suspect, she called Tom. When she realized her marriage was built on lies and she needed to protect herself and her future child, she called Tom. He spread the documents across the cafe table with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this kind of thing 1,000 times before. Even so, I could see the glint of satisfaction in his eyes as he explained what Rachel had built. The company is held in an irrevocable trust, he said, keeping his voice low despite the privacy of our corner booth. It was established before your marriage, funded entirely with money you earned yourself. Marcus has no legal claim to any of it. He cannot access it, cannot dissolve it, cannot even know about it unless you choose to tell him. He tapped another document. This is the documentation of his behavior. Gambling debts, financial manipulation, evidence of the affair, including dates, locations, and photographic proof. Every lie he has told you, every promise he has broken, every time he has accessed your joint accounts without your knowledge or consent. I stared at the stack of papers, at the sheer volume of evidence my best friend had compiled without any of us suspecting a thing. How long have you been gathering this? 6 years, Rachel said calmly, since the first time I caught him gambling. I knew then that something was wrong, even if I did not want to admit it to myself. So I started keeping records, just in case. Just in case. She had been married for 8 years, and for 6 of them, she had been quietly, methodically building a case against her own husband, planning for a day she hoped would never come, but that she was too smart not to prepare for. What happens now? I asked. Now we wait, Tom said. Rachel needs to have the baby safely. We need to make sure the child's interests are protected before we make any moves. And we need to make sure that when we do act, Marcus has no escape route, no hidden assets, no legal loopholes, no way to turn this around on Rachel. Rachel nodded, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. And there is something else I found out, something that changes everything. She told us about the Costa Rica plan. Marcus was preparing to liquidate their joint accounts after the baby was born. He had already bought plane tickets for himself and Jessica. He was going to take everything he could get his hands on and disappear to a country with no extradition treaty, leaving Rachel with nothing but a newborn and a mountain of debt. He has been transferring money slowly for months, Rachel said. Small amounts that would not trigger any alerts. I only caught it because I have been watching our accounts like a hawk. She smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a chess player who has just realized their opponent has walked into a trap. He does not know I know, she said. He has no idea that I have been 10 steps ahead of him for years. He thinks I am stupid. He thinks I am weak. He thinks I have no options. That is going to be his biggest mistake. I remember leaving that cafe with a strange mixture of emotions churning in my gut. Pride in my friend who had shown more strength and strategic thinking than anyone I had ever known. Fear for what was coming, for the battle that was about to unfold. And something else, something I could not quite name at the time. Awe, maybe. At the realization that the woman I thought I knew, my sweet Rachel, who cried at commercials and adopted stray cats and made lesson plans about butterflies, had been quietly building a $47 million empire while her husband thought she was playing housewife. Document everything, she told me as we walked to the subway together. That was her advice, Her parting words of wisdom from 6 years of surviving in a marriage to a man who would have destroyed her if he could. Screenshots, recordings, bank statements. When you are fighting someone with more power than you, information is your only weapon. Build an arsenal, Claire. You never know when you might need it. I thought it was good advice at the time. The kind of thing you hear and nod along to, file away in the back of your mind, but never really expect to use. I had no idea how soon those words would become my lifeline. The weeks that followed were tense but hopeful. Rachel played her part perfectly, the dutiful pregnant wife who suspected nothing, who fussed over nursery colors and baby names while her husband carried on his affair with increasingly brazen confidence. She smiled when Marcus came home late smelling of Jessica's perfume. She nodded when he explained his weekend absences as work emergencies. She waited and watched and documented everything. She called me one afternoon, excitement barely contained in her voice. I found his escape plan. All of it. The accounts in the Caymans, the tickets to Costa Rica, the fake passport he had made for himself. Fake passport? Apparently he has been planning this for a while, longer than I realized. He has a whole second identity set up, ready to go the moment things get complicated here. She laughed, and it was a sound of pure triumph. He has no idea I have copies of everything. He thinks his little hidden email account is secure because he uses a password I would never guess. He does not know I installed a keylogger on his laptop 3 years ago. Jesus, Rachel, I know. She sounded almost giddy. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to understand, Claire. I have been living with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he is capable of. And I knew from the beginning that if things ever went bad, I needed to have insurance. What are you going to do with all of it? Nothing yet. I am going to wait until Hope is born, until she is safe and healthy and protected. And then I am going to burn his whole world down. It was the first time she had told me the baby's name. Hope. She was naming her daughter Hope. And in that moment, despite everything, I believed that things were going to be okay. That Rachel had planned for everything. That she was going to win. I should have known better. I should have remembered that life does not follow scripts. That even the best laid plans can crumble in the face of things no one could have predicted. But I did not know what was coming. None of us did. 3 catastrophic events happened in the span of 2 weeks, one after another, like dominoes falling in a pattern designed by cruelty itself. Each one was devastating on its own. Together, they nearly destroyed everything Rachel had built. The first catastrophe struck without warning. Rachel was at Jefferson Elementary School, standing in front of a classroom full of parents during a routine conference about their children's reading progress. She was in the middle of explaining a particularly struggling student's improvement when she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen, followed by a gush of warmth between her legs. She looked down and saw blood spreading across the floor. The next few hours were a blur of sirens and hospital corridors and doctors speaking in urgent tones. Emergency cesarean section at 32 weeks. The baby was too early. The placenta had detached. They needed to operate immediately or they would lose them both. Hope Morrison was born at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September. 4 pounds, 2 ounces of fighting spirit immediately whisked away to the NICU where tubes and monitors would keep her alive while her tiny body learned to do what nature had not given her enough time to prepare for. Rachel survived the surgery. Barely. She lost a dangerous amount of blood, and her blood pressure dropped so low the doctors were not sure she would make it through the night. But she did, because Rachel had never been a quitter, because she had too much unfinished business to give up now. She woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, weak as a kitten, her body a symphony of pain and exhaustion. The first thing she asked about was Hope. The second thing she asked about was her phone. She could not execute her plan from a hospital bed. She could not meet with Tom Whitmore or monitor Marcus's accounts or prepare the legal documents that would protect her daughter. Every day she spent recovering was a day Marcus might discover what she had been building, might find some way to turn things around, might escape to Costa Rica before she could stop him. I visited her every day, bringing her magazines she did not read and smoothies she could barely drink. I watched her grow more and more anxious as her body refused to cooperate with her timeline. She was supposed to be strong right now. She was supposed to be Fawadmas. Instead, She was trapped in a hospital bed, dependent on doctors and nurses and a husband who visited rarely and stayed briefly. That was the first catastrophe, the loss of time, of strength, of control. The second came 3 days later in the form of a visitor Rachel had not expected. Diana Morrison arrived at the hospital with a bouquet of flowers and a cashmere blanket for the baby, dressed in the kind of casual elegance that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She kissed Rachel's cheek with lips that had never learned how to form genuine affection, and she settled into the chair beside the bed with the air of someone who intended to stay a while. "I came to help," Diana said, her voice sweet as antifreeze. "Marcus is so busy with work, and you need someone to look after you while you recover. We are family, after all." Rachel was too weak to argue, too tired to notice the way Diana's eyes flickered toward her phone on the bedside table, toward her laptop in its bag by the window, too medicated to see the predator circling behind the sheep's clothing. I arrived at the hospital that afternoon to visit Rachel, carrying a bag of her favorite cookies and a book I thought she might enjoy. I pushed open the door to her room, expecting to find her alone or maybe with a nurse checking her vitals. Instead, I found Diana Morrison bent over Rachel's bedside table, Rachel's phone in her hands, scrolling through something on the screen with intense concentration. Rachel was asleep. The machines beside her bed beeped steadily, pumping medications that kept her sedated while her body healed. She had no idea what was happening 3 feet away from her unconscious form. "Diana," I said, and my voice came out sharp enough to cut glass. She looked up, and for just a moment I saw something in her eyes. Triumph, satisfaction, the look of a hunter who has finally cornered her prey. Then it was gone, replaced by a pleasant smile and an innocent expression that would have fooled anyone who was not looking carefully. "Claire, dear, I was just checking to see if Rachel had gotten any important messages. You know how she worries about that little business of hers." She set the phone down and gathered her things with unhurried grace. "I have to run, but I will be back tomorrow. Make sure she gets her rest." She swept out of the room like she had done nothing wrong, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the cold certainty in my gut that something terrible had just happened. I grabbed Rachel's phone the moment Diana was gone. I did not know her passcode, but I could see the recent apps on the lock screen. Email, notes, documents, all of them accessed within the last hour. I woke Rachel up and told her everything. The color drained from her face as I spoke. Her hands trembled as she took the phone from me and scrolled through her history, seeing all the things Diana had accessed: emails about the divorce, messages to Tom Whitmore, documents referencing EduSpark and its $47 million valuation. "She knows," Rachel whispered. "She knows everything." Diana called Marcus that night. We found out later what she told him when the pieces finally fell into place. She told him about Rachel's secret company, about the divorce papers being prepared, about the evidence Rachel had gathered against him. She told him everything, and Marcus Morrison came to the hospital the next morning like a storm making landfall. He burst into Rachel's room while she was trying to breastfeed Hope for the first time, her body still weak, her mind still foggy from medication. The baby was not latching properly, and Rachel had been crying in frustration. And then suddenly her husband was there, looming over her bed with fury in his eyes. "You think you can leave me?" His voice was a hiss, low enough that the nurses outside would not hear, but vicious enough to draw blood. "You think your little teacher website scares me?" "I know about everything now, Rachel. My mother told me everything." He leaned closer, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I will bury you in court. I will take Hope. My mother will testify that you are mentally unstable, that the pregnancy broke your brain, that you are unfit to care for a child. You will never see your daughter again." Hospital security removed him 10 minutes later, after a nurse heard Rachel crying and came to investigate. But the damage was done. All her careful planning, all her meticulous preparation, all her hope for a clean victory, shattered by her mother-in-law's snooping and her husband's rage. She sobbed for hours after he left. She held Hope in her arms and cried until she had nothing left, until her eyes were swollen shut and her voice was gone and the monitors beside her bed started beeping an alarm. That was the second catastrophe, the loss of secrecy, of surprise, of the upper hand. The third was the worst of all. Rachel's condition worsened dramatically over the following days. An infection, the doctor said, though they seemed puzzled by its aggressiveness. They pumped her full of antibiotics, but nothing seemed to help. Her fever spiked. Her organs showed signs of stress. Her recovery, which should have been steady, instead reversed course entirely. I noticed something during Diana's visits. She came every day now, solicitous and concerned, bringing herbal tea from a special wellness scheme in Connecticut that she swore would help Rachel heal faster. "It is an old family recipe," Diana said, pressing a steaming cup into Rachel's trembling hands. "My grandmother used it. My mother used it. It has healing properties you will not find in any pharmacy." Rachel drank it to be polite, to keep the peace, to avoid another confrontation while she was too weak to fight back. The night after Diana's third visit, Rachel's monitor started screaming. "Code blue." A voice over the intercom. "Crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when it happened, dozing in an uncomfortable chair because I had refused to leave the hospital for 3 days. I heard the announcement and I knew, somehow I just knew, that it was Rachel. I ran to her room and pressed my face against the glass, watching helplessly as doctors and nurses swarmed around her bed. Her heart had stopped. Her organs were failing one by one. She was dying right in front of me, and there was nothing I could do except stand there and pray to a God I was not sure I believed in anymore. They brought her back. Twice. The second time, they were not sure she would survive. But she did. She always did. When she opened her eyes the next morning, I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand like I could physically keep her tethered to this world through sheer force of will. She looked at me with clarity that cut through all the medication and exhaustion, and she spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Diana is poisoning me." "Rachel," I started, ready to dismiss it as paranoia, as the fever talking, as anything other than what my gut was already screaming at me. I saved the cup. Rachel's voice was weak but certain. "The last cup of tea she brought me. It is in the drawer of my bedside table. Get it tested, Claire, and save samples of my blood and hair from the hospital." Chain of custody documented. She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "I am not going to make it. I can feel it, Claire. Whatever she is giving me, it is winning. But I am not going to let them win. Not Diana, not Marcus, not any of them." She made me promise that day. Promise to play the video she had recorded. Promise to make sure everyone was watching when the truth came out. Promise to protect Hope no matter what happened next. I made those promises, and I meant every one of them. I just did not know yet what keeping them would cost. Rachel was moved to hospice care on a rainy Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Hope's birth. The infection had spread despite every antibiotic the doctors had tried. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one like lights going out in a house at the end of a party. The doctors were baffled, frustrated. "A healthy 32-year-old woman should not decline this quickly," they said. "There must be something we are missing." I knew what they were missing. I had sent the teacup to a private laboratory for testing, using money Rachel had insisted I take from a secret account she maintained for emergencies. The results would take time Rachel did not have, but I knew in my gut what they would show. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her daughter-in-law, slowly, methodically, with the patience of someone who had been planning this for months, maybe years. Detective Sarah Brennan found me in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was transferred to hospice. She was a tough woman, 45 years old with 20 years on the force, the kind of weathered face and sharp eyes that came from seeing too much of humanity's worst and somehow managing to keep going anyway. "I knew her mother," Brennan said, settling into the chair across from me with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been sitting in the pot for hours. "Betty Johnson. Worked a case at her diner years ago, back when I was fresh out of the academy and still believed I could save the world. Sweetest woman I ever met. Her daughter too, from what I remember." She took a sip of her terrible coffee and studied my face. "Something is not right here. Healthy pregnant women do not just deteriorate like this. The medical staff is scratching their heads, which usually means there is something they are not looking for because they do not want to find it." "What are you saying?" "I am saying I am looking into it. Quietly, off the books for now until I have something solid. But if you know something, anything that might explain why a healthy young woman is dying in that hospital bed upstairs, now would be the time to tell me." I told her about the teacup, about Diana's visits and the herbal tea, about Rachel's conviction that her mother-in-law was killing her. Brennan listened without interrupting, her expression growing grimmer with each word. "Get me that lab report," she said when I finished, "and anything else Rachel documented. If this is what I think it is, we are going to need every piece of evidence we can get." Rachel's last days were spent in a hospice room with a window overlooking a garden she was too weak to visit. Late afternoon sun streamed through the glass, painting everything gold. The machines around her bed beeped softly, marking time that was running out. I sat with her every day, holding her hand, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes she was lucid, sharp as ever despite the drugs and the failing organs. Other times she drifted, murmuring about butterflies and lesson plans and a little girl named Hope, who she would never watch grow up. On her last lucid day, she made me promise again. I wrote letters, she told me, her voice barely above a whisper. For Hope, for every birthday until she is 18, first day of school, first heartbreak, graduation, her wedding day. Tears rolled down my cheeks. "Rachel," I started, but she squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Let me finish." I wrote letters for all of it. Everything I will miss. Everything I wanted to tell her. Or my words will be there even when I cannot be. She took a shaky breath, and I wrote something else. For Marcus, for Jessica, for Diana. A different kind of letter. The kind they will not be able to ignore or dismiss or pretend never existed. She smiled then, weak and sad, but somehow still fierce. Still Rachel. They think I am dying weak and broken. They think they have won, that they got away with it, that the trailer park girl finally got what she deserved. They have no idea what is coming, Claire. No idea. I spent 6 years building a $47 million empire while my husband thought I was making worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. I outplayed him at every turn, and he never even knew we were in a game. If that is not wife material, I do not know what is. She laughed softly and then coughed, her whole body shaking with the effort. "Promise me you will play the video. Promise me everyone will be watching, especially Diana, especially Marcus, especially his Instagram princess." "I promise," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Promise me you will take care of Hope, raise her to be strong. Tell her about me. The real me, not the victim they will try to make me into. Tell her I fought until the very end. I promise. Promise me you will finish what I started." There is a folder in Tom Whitmore's office. Phase 2, it is labeled. If Marcus ever threatens Hope, if he ever tries to take what is hers, you open that folder and you burn him to the ground. I promise, Rachel. I promise you everything. She died at 3:47 in the morning on a cold October Tuesday. I was the only one there, holding her hand as the monitors flatlined and the room went quiet. The nurses came and went. The hospice chaplain said words I did not hear. Outside, the rain that had been falling all day finally stopped, and the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky. Her last words were a whisper, so soft I almost missed them. "Make them watch, Claire. Every single one of them." "I intend to," I told her, though she was already gone. "I intend to." Attorney Thomas Whitmore stood at the podium of St. Andrew's Church with the envelope in his weathered hands, and 200 people held their breath waiting to see what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus sat in the front row with Jessica beside him, looking more annoyed than concerned. He had expected this to be a formality, a quick reading of a simple will that would leave everything to him as the surviving spouse. He had no idea what was coming. I, Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Whitmore's voice was steady, carrying to every corner of the church. He read the preamble slowly, deliberately, drawing out the tension in a way that made even me want to scream at him to get on with it. Then he reached the first revelation, and everything changed. "To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave the entirety of my shares in EduSpark Digital, a company I founded and built from nothing over the course of 6 years. These shares are held in an irrevocable trust, owned to be managed by my friend and sole trustee, Claire Bennett, until Hope reaches the age of 25. He paused, letting that sink in. "At the time of my death, EduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current projections estimate the company will reach 80 million in value within 2 years. The gasp that went through the church was audible. Marcus's head snapped up, his expression shifting from boredom to confusion to something like terror. "That is impossible," he said, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She sold lesson plans. She made $200 a month." Whitmore looked at him with the patient contempt of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and CEO of EduSpark Digital, the largest independent teacher resource platform in the United States. The company was established before your marriage and held in a trust structure that provided complete legal separation from marital assets. You were never informed of its existence because Mrs. Morrison chose not to inform you. Diana Morrison shot to her feet. "This is fraud. She hid assets from her husband." "That is illegal. It is entirely legal," Whitmore replied calmly. "The company was established before the marriage. All growth was funded through the company's own revenues, not marital funds. I have documentation going back 6 years that proves Mrs. Morrison built this enterprise independently without any contribution from Mr. Morrison. Perhaps you should sit down, Mrs. Morrison." Diana did not sit down. She stood there, quivering with rage, until Marcus pulled her back into her seat. Marcus tried to recover. I could see him pulling himself together, straightening his tie, forcing his expression into something calmer. "Fine," he said. "Whatever. As Hope's father, I will manage the trust until she comes of age. The money stays in the family." Whitmore did not blink. "I am not finished, Mr. Morrison, and I believe what comes next will address your assumption about parental rights." He pressed a button on a remote control, and a screen descended behind the coffin. Rachel's face appeared, filmed in her hospice bed just days before her death. She looked terrible. Thin and pale, dark circles under her eyes, her body visibly failing. But her eyes were alive, fierce, almost amused in a way that made my heart clench with pride and grief in equal measure. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was weak but clear through the speakers. "Jessica, Diana, if you are watching this, I am gone. And you are probably feeling pretty confident right now." She paused, letting that sink in. "Shocked about the money, sure, but you think you will figure it out. You think you will get Hope, control the trust, find some loophole your expensive lawyers overlooked. You think you have won because you always think you have won. Because people like you cannot imagine a world where someone like me outsmarts you." Another pause, a smile that made my skin prickle. "You have no idea what is coming. So sit down, shut up, and pay attention. Class is in session." The video continued, and with each passing moment, the foundations of Marcus and Jessica and Diana Morrison crumbled a little more. "Jessica," Rachel said, "I want to thank you. I know that sounds strange, but hear me out. When I first found out about your affair with my husband, I was devastated. I cried for 3 days straight. I thought my life was over, that everything I had worked for had been destroyed by a 28-year-old Instagram influencer who could not keep her hands off another woman's husband." She paused, and her smile turned sharp. "Then I got angry, and then I got smart. And when I started digging into Marcus's secrets, really digging, I found something interesting about my own life, something I had never bothered to look into before." Documents appeared on the screen behind her. DNA test results with clinical formatting and official letterhead. "Marcus, Hope is not your daughter." The church exploded. People shouted, gasped, leaped to their feet. Marcus's face went white as paper, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. "I had an affair too," Rachel continued, her voice calm against the chaos. "Once, 3 years ago. Right after I discovered your first round of gambling debts, the ones you swore were a one-time mistake. I met someone at an education conference who treated me with respect, who looked at me like I was a person, not a trophy or a charity case, who actually listened when I spoke instead of waiting for his turn to talk." She shrugged on screen. "I am not proud of it. I was raised to believe marriage vows were sacred, but I am not sorry either. The DNA test is attached to my will, witnessed and notarized. You have no biological connection to Hope, no parental rights, no legal claim to custody. The man who fathered her will be contacted through my attorney, and the choice of whether to be involved in her life will be his and my daughter's alone." Marcus looked like he might vomit. Beside him, Jessica had gone very still, the color draining from her carefully contoured face. "Now, Diana, my dear mother-in-law." Diana flinched like someone had slapped her. Her composure cracked, showing something ugly underneath. "Detective Brennan," Rachel said, "I know you are here. I asked Tom to invite you personally." I watched Brennan move through the crowd, her badge already visible, her expression the professional blankness of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "I believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me," Rachel continued. "The herbal tea she brought to my hospital room every day? I saved the last cup. It is currently being held as evidence by Attorney Whitmore, with documented chain of custody." Diana tried to stand, tried to move toward the aisle. Brennan was there first, blocking her path with casual efficiency. "I also saved samples of my blood and hair from the hospital," Rachel said. "Also documented, also in evidence. The test should be coming back any day now. I suspect they will show elevated levels of thallium, a heavy metal that mimics natural illness and is nearly impossible to detect without specific testing." Diana's voice rose to a screech. "This is insane." She was paranoid. The pregnancy affected her mind. "I never poisoned anyone." Rachel on screen, as if she had anticipated this exact response. "Diana will probably say I was mentally unstable, paranoid, delusional. But I was a straight A student, a national merit scholar. I built a $47 million company while everyone around me thought I was making worksheets about butterflies. Does that sound like someone who has lost her grip on reality?" The third revelation hit like a hammer blow. "Marcus, let us talk about your work. Specifically the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City, and the embezzlement you have been committing at Morrison and Associates to cover those debts." Documents flashed across the screen, bank records, wire transfers, betting slips. A paper trail that wound through shell, companies, and offshore accounts. All of it meticulously documented and annotated. "I have sent copies of everything to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your firm's ethics board. By Monday morning, you will not have a law license. By Friday, you will probably be in handcuffs. And those gentlemen in Atlantic City who have been so patiently waiting for their money, they will be very interested to learn that their debtor no longer has the resources to pay them back." Marcus was shaking now, visibly trembling, sweat breaking out on his forehead, his $3,000 suit suddenly looking like a costume he no longer fit into. But Rachel was not finished. "Oh, Jessica, one more thing, sweetheart." Jessica, who had been slowly edging away from Marcus, froze in place. "I know you have been selling Marcus's insider trading information to Greg Holloway, his biggest business rival. I have the emails, the Venmo payments, the text messages where you called Marcus, and I quote, 'a useful idiot who is too arrogant to notice he is being played.'" The screen showed a text thread. Jessica's face collapsed. "Marcus, your mistress has been destroying your career from the inside while you were busy destroying me. She has been working for your enemy this whole time, feeding him every piece of valuable information you were stupid enough to share with her. You thought she loved you. She thought you were a stepping stone. I think that makes you two perfect for each other." Marcus turned to Jessica with murder in his eyes. "You were working for Greg." Jessica's composure shattered completely. "Marcus, I can explain. It was not like that. I was just protecting myself in case things went wrong. You were selling my information. I could go to prison because of you." "Oh, that is rich." Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. "You are the one who embezzled money. You are the one with gambling debts. I just made sure I would be taken care of when you inevitably screwed everything up." They screamed at each other in the front pew of the church while 200 people watched, and dozens of phones recorded every word. My best friend's funeral had become the most dramatic reality show any of them had ever witnessed. "Never underestimate a quiet woman," Rachel said on screen, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Still waters do not just run deep. Sometimes they are hiding a tsunami. And sometimes that tsunami has spent 6 years learning exactly where all the fault lines are." Police cars arrived at St. Andrew's Church within 20 minutes of Rachel's video ending. Detective Brennan had called for backup before the second revelation, knowing what was coming, preparing to act on 6 years of documented evidence. Diana Morrison was escorted out of the church in handcuffs, her screams echoing off the vaulted ceilings. She invoked her family name, her lawyers, her connections in Connecticut society. None of it mattered. The officer guiding her toward the waiting squad car looked supremely unbothered by her protests. "I have rights," Dinah shrieked. "I want my attorney. This is defamation. That woman was insane. I never poisoned anyone." The lab results came back 2 days later. Thallium, just as Rachel had suspected. A slow-acting poison that accumulated in the body over time, mimicking the symptoms of infection and organ failure. Diana had been dosing her daughter-in-law for weeks, maybe months, with the patience and precision of someone who had planned every detail. She would spend the rest of her life in prison. Marcus was served with federal subpoenas before he could leave the church. SEC, FBI, IRS. His firm fired him by the end of the day, issuing a press release that called him a disgrace to the profession and an embarrassment to the legal community. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The Costa Rica tickets in his desk drawer would never be used. The gambling creditors came calling 3 days later. Marcus had been denied bail as a flight risk, so he was safely in federal custody when two very large men showed up at his empty apartment looking for their money. They left disappointed but undeterred. Men like them had long memories. Jessica Crane was arrested on 17 counts of insider trading, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and accessory to financial crimes. Her mugshot went viral within hours. Mascara running, hair tangled, designer dress wrinkled from the holding cell. Her Instagram followers dropped from 87,000 to less than 8,000 overnight. The comments were savage. "This is what happens when you fumble morals for a married man. Imagine losing everything for a guy who was already losing everything." She really thought she was the main character. Plot twist. She was the cautionary tale. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and grief. Rachel had won. She had outplayed everyone who had ever underestimated her, and she had done it from beyond the grave. But she was still gone, and no amount of justice could bring her back. 2 weeks after the funeral, Greg Holloway contacted me through Attorney Whitmore. He was nervous when we met, fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that seemed completely at odds with the ruthless businessman Marcus had always described. He was 40 years old, successful, well-dressed in a way that suggested money without screaming about it. But it was his eyes that caught my attention. They were kind, genuine, full of a grief that mirrored my own. "I loved her," he said quietly. "Rachel. We only had 3 months together, but I loved her. She was the most remarkable woman I had ever met. Smart and strong and funny, and so completely unaware of how extraordinary she was." He looked down at his hands. She did not want to leave Marcus then. She thought she could fix the marriage, save it somehow. She kept saying she had made a commitment, that she had to try everything before giving up. By the time she realized the marriage was beyond saving, she was pregnant, and then everything started falling apart. He showed me a photograph. Rachel on a beach somewhere, laughing at the camera, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked happier than I had seen her in years, maybe ever. "I did not know about hope," Greg said. "Not until the funeral. The DNA test. Rachel never told me she was pregnant with my child. I think she was trying to protect me, or maybe protect herself. She knew Marcus would destroy her if he found out." He looked up at me, his eyes wet. "I want to be part of Hope's life. I want to help raise her, give her everything Rachel would have wanted her to have. Not because of the money or the inheritance or any of that, because she is my daughter, and because loving her is the only way I have left to love her mother." I studied him across the table, this man Rachel had chosen, even if only briefly, even if in secret. I saw what she must have seen. Kindness, authenticity, someone real in a world full of Marcus Morrisons. "Hope needs a father," I said finally. "She needs someone who will love her for who she is, not for what she represents. Can you be that person?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I can. I will. I promise you, Claire. I promise Rachel." We worked out an arrangement over the following weeks, joint custody, with me as Hope's legal guardian and Greg as her acknowledged biological father. He set up trusts and college funds and everything a child could ever need. But more than that, he showed up. Every day, without fail, learning to change diapers and prepare bottles and sing lullabies that put Hope to sleep. He was there because he wanted to be, not because he had to be. That was when I finally allowed myself to believe that things might actually be okay. 1 year passed, seasons changed, leaves fell and grew again, and life continued its relentless march forward, even when grief made every step feel impossible. I passed the bar exam on my first try. I was a licensed attorney now, inspired by Rachel, driven by a purpose I had never felt before. The trust paid me a salary as Hope's guardian, enough that I could finally stop worrying about rent and start focusing on building the future Rachel would have wanted for all of us. Hope was thriving, a happy, healthy 1-year-old with Rachel's eyes and Greg's easy smile. She laughed at everything, reached for everything, lived each moment with the kind of uncomplicated joy that reminded me why Rachel had fought so hard to protect her. My daughter Lily, now 9 years old, had appointed herself Hope's official big sister. She read bedtime stories and helped with bath time and announced to everyone she met that her baby sister was the smartest, prettiest, most wonderful baby in the entire world. Greg had moved to New York to be close to us. He rented an apartment 2 floors up in my building, close enough to be part of Hope's daily life without crowding the unconventional family we were building together. We were not romantic, Greg and I. We were something stranger and maybe more durable. Partners in the most important project either of us had ever undertaken. EduSpark continued to grow. $80 million in value now, with projections heading toward $100 million within the year. Rachel had handpicked the new CEO, left detailed instructions for the company's future, and created an endowment that would fund scholarships for children of single mothers for generations to come, the Betty Johnson Scholarship Fund. In honor of the woman who had worked her whole life so her daughter could have opportunities she never had. Betty herself lived in a comfortable house in Tennessee now, paid for by the trust. She had finally retired from the diner, finally stopped working doubles, finally had time to tend her garden and call her granddaughter on video chat every Sunday afternoon. Hope's first birthday party was small but perfect. Pink balloons filled my apartment. A homemade banner declared, "Happy First Birthday, Hope," in uneven letters, courtesy of Lily's enthusiastic crafting. The guests were few, but essential. Lily, Greg, Betty, Tom Whitmore, people who had loved Rachel and would love her daughter in her place. I wheeled a small television into the living room as everyone gathered. Rachel left videos for Hope, I explained. One for every milestone. First birthday, first day of school, first heartbreak, graduation, wedding day. She asked me to play them. The room went quiet. Rachel's face appeared on screen. She was in the hospice bed, but she had put on lipstick and done something with her hair, made an effort to look like herself even as her body failed around her. The medical equipment was visible behind her, the tubes and monitors that marked her final days. But she had arranged the shot to minimize their presence. Typical Rachel, thinking about aesthetics even when she was dying. "My darling Hope," she said, and her voice was weak but warm, filled with a love that transcended the limitations of the recording. "Happy first birthday, baby girl. If you are watching this, I am not there to hold you, to kiss your cheeks, to watch you smash cake all over your face and laugh with delight at the mess you have made." She smiled, and for a moment she looked almost healthy, almost like the Rachel I had known for 25 years. "I am so sorry I could not stay. I fought so hard, Hope, harder than I have ever fought for anything in my life. But some battles cannot be won, not in the way we want them to be won. Sometimes fighting means knowing when to let go and trusting that the people you leave behind will carry on your work." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Rachel had always been stronger than anyone gave her credit for. "I need you to know something important. Everything I did in my life, everything that mattered, I did for you. I built a company not because I loved money or success or proving people wrong, though I will admit that last part was satisfying. I built it because I knew you would need protection, because I knew there would be people in this world who would try to take what is yours, who would look at you and see only what they could use you for. I wanted you to have armor, resources, independence. I wanted you to never need anyone else to survive, so that when you chose to let people into your life, it would be because you wanted them there, not because you had no other option." She took a shaky breath. "Be brave, Hope. Be kind. Be smart. Work hard, but not so hard that you forget to laugh. Love deeply, but not so deeply that you lose yourself. Stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. Question everything, especially the people who tell you not to question them. And hope? One more thing, the most important thing I will ever tell you. Her eyes found the camera lens, looking directly at us through the screen, through time, through death itself. Never, ever let anyone tell you that you are nothing without them. You are everything. You are my everything. You are Rachel Morrison's daughter, and that means you are stronger than anyone knows, including yourself. I love you, forever and always, no matter what happens, no matter how far apart we are. Happy birthday, sweetheart. The video ended. Everyone was crying. Betty clutched a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Greg held Hope close, his cheeks wet, whispering something too quiet for the rest of us to hear. Even Tom Whitmore, who I had never seen express any emotion beyond mild professional interest, wiped his eyes with the corner of his handkerchief. Lily pressed against my side, her arms around my waist. She is not really gone, is she, Mama? As long as Hope has those videos? No, baby, I said, pulling her close. She is not really gone at all. 3 days later, a letter arrived at my new law office. No return address, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility where Marcus was awaiting trial. I opened it with steady hands. Whatever he had to say could not hurt me, could not hurt Rachel, could not touch the future we had built from the ashes of his betrayal. Claire, the letter read, "This is not over. My lawyers are working on the DNA evidence. Something does not add up. And when I prove that Hope is mine, I am coming for custody. I am coming for the trust. I am coming for everything Rachel stole from me. See you in court. Marcus." I should have been afraid. A year ago, a letter like this would have sent me into a panic. But I had spent 12 months learning to think like Rachel, planning for contingencies, building arsenals of information and documentation, preparing for exactly this moment. I picked up my phone. "Tom, it is Claire." He sent a letter. "Yes, threatening custody. I know. I know Rachel prepared for this." I pulled open my desk drawer. Inside was a thick folder I had never opened, labeled in Rachel's careful handwriting. Phase 2. If he threatens Hope, open only if necessary. I broke the seal and began to read. Documents, photographs, recordings, a USB drive labeled insurance, and a handwritten note from my best friend, penned in the final weeks of her life. Claire, if you are reading this, Marcus is still fighting. Some men never learn. They get knocked down and they get back up and they keep swinging. Not because they believe they can win, but because they cannot imagine any other way to exist. Phase 1 was the funeral, the revelations, the arrest, the public humiliation. I hoped that would be enough. I hoped he would slink away and leave Hope in peace. But I knew him, Claire. I knew him better than anyone, better than he knew himself. So I prepared Phase 2. He has no idea what I found during those 6 years I spent documenting his crimes, what I saved, what I held back, waiting for exactly this moment. He thinks the funeral was everything. He thinks I showed all my cards. He is wrong. Finish him, Claire. For me, for Hope, for every woman who has ever been told she is nothing without the man who is destroying her. Love always, Rachel. P.S. Tell Hope her mama says hi, and tell Marcus, checkmate. I smiled, the same smile Rachel had worn in her hospital video. Confident, fierce, ready. Rachel, I said softly, you brilliant, terrifying, magnificent woman. How many more surprises did you leave me? I started reading the folder's contents. Names, dates, evidence of crimes that made the funeral revelations look like parking tickets. Enough ammunition to keep Marcus in prison for decades, to destroy what little remained of his reputation, to ensure he never posed a threat to Hope or anyone else ever again. Outside my office window, the city sprawled in all directions, millions of lives unfolding in their own private dramas. Somewhere in federal custody, Marcus Morrison was probably congratulating himself on his threatening letter, imagining he still had power, still had options, still had a chance. He was wrong. Rachel had made sure of that. I picked up my phone to call Tom Whitmore, to begin the process of Phase 2, to finish what my best friend had started. Justice is patient, I thought. remembering the words that had flashed across the screen at the end of Rachel's funeral video. But she never forgets. Neither would I. And that is how Rachel Morrison, a woman everyone underestimated, a woman they called trailer trash and boring and nothing without her husband, proved them all wrong from beyond the grave. She taught us something important today. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Never assume that silence means weakness. And never, ever believe that money and power can protect you from the consequences of cruelty. If this story moved you, if it made you angry or hopeful, or reminded you of your own strength, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Rachel's place? Would you have fought back the same way she did? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story today, someone who might be feeling trapped or powerless or like they have no options, share this with them. Sometimes a story is exactly what someone needs to remember their own strength. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Because here on this channel, we believe in justice. We believe in karma. And we believe that the quiet ones, they are always the most dangerous. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you in the next story.